Hey everyone, welcome to the Wise Tutor YouTube channel. Today we're starting Unit 2, which is cells, and this is video 1 where we're going to be comparing prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So here's a quick Venn diagram here, and it would be useful in your comparison of these two different types of cells to and types of organisms to really pay attention to these differences. So for prokaryotes, you've got the fact that they're unicellular and less complex, as opposed to eukaryotes who are multicellular and more complex. And what you usually see in eukaryotes is that there's always usually specialization. So specialization of cells, meaning that there are some heart cells, for example, some liver cells, some muscle cells, some neurons, which are nerve cells. So you see the specialization. One organism is multicellular, one it is a eukaryote. The second thing that we're going to talk about is that prokaryotes have no membrane enclosed organelles. So all of their organelles that they have no membrane, okay? As opposed to eukaryotes, which have membrane enclosed organelles. All of the organelles in a eukaryote have membranes, all right? And a huge example of that, as opposed to this one, is the nucleus. The nucleus has a nuclear membrane for eukaryotes. Prokaryotes don't even have a nucleus, okay? And that's actually our next bullet, that prokaryotes have a nucleoid that contains circular DNA. And that circular DNA is referred to as plasmid. And you will hear that in the future in our bacterial. There's a bacterial lab that most likely you'll do later on in the year. And they really stress plasmids as circular DNA found in bacteria or prokaryotes. Here you've got, in eukaryotes, you've got a nucleus containing linear DNA. And this is the most common type. We'll talk about DNA in the DNA unit. And this is important, an important difference to kind of recognize that the nucleoid is kind of a region where the circular DNA is found, but the nucleus is an actual organelle that contains that linear DNA. And the nucleus also has, as I said, a nuclear membrane. So prokaryotes have also, most of them at least, have a peptoglycan cell wall. And this is a sugar that makes up the cell wall and makes it more rigid. As opposed to a lot of eukaryotes, mainly animal cells that we're talking about here, that contain other organelles, such as the nucleus, the endomembrane system, which consists of the Golgi apparatus, and the smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. These are all things that we'll be talking about in the next cells video, or the one after that one, I guess, and the mitochondria as well. For plant cells, they obviously have chloroplast as well, and cell wall, but those we will be talking about in our next video. Now prokaryotes, most of the prokaryotes have a flagella, which is a tail for movement. All right, it's used for movement to kind of propel the prokaryote in space or in water, wherever it's going. Eukaryotes, some of them have flagella, and it's not often for a eukaryote to have a flagella. And a lot of them, a lot of the eukaryotes that do have a flagella don't just have one, they have multiple, and they're kind of smaller than the big flagella for the prokaryotes. So you'll see that difference. Here prokaryotes have something called a pili, which is useful for conjugation. Conjugation is basically a way of DNA transfer between one bacterial organism and another. And the pili really are used for the two bacteria to kind of link up and act as a bridge for the DNA, the DNA plasmids, to be transferred from one bacteria to another. Here, eukaryotes have something that's kind of similar to a pili, called a cilia. The cilia are used for cells to adhere to each other and to surfaces, but they don't have like a method of conjugation similar to the prokaryotes. Conjugation is specific for bacterial organisms in transferring the DNA from one bacteria to another. Another difference is that prokaryotes asexually reproduce through binary fission, as opposed to eukaryotes, which their reproduction, or how they make more eukaryotic cells, is through mitosis. All right. And finally, some examples of prokaryotes include bacteria and archaea, and then eukaryotes are pretty much everything else. So plants and animal cells, and we'll really talk about the distinction between these two types of cells in the next video. So let's take a look at the visual differences between them. So you've got here a bacterial organism, which is a prokaryote. You've got the nucleoid, which contains the genetic information in circular fashion or form called plasmids. You've also got ribosomes in here. And so now we're going to talk about some of the similarities. Okay, so between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, you've got several organelles or cell components that are included in both. You've got the cytoplasm, that's kind of like the gel or liquid gel that's found around the entire cell. You've got ribosomes, which are not membrane enclosed. So that's important to recognize too. Ribosomes are not membrane enclosed. And finally, you've got cell membranes. Just the cell membrane, not any membrane enclosed organelles in the prokaryotes. Okay, but in both you generally have those three organelles or types components of cells. And the other thing is that they both contain genetic material or information in the form of DNA. It's just that the DNA has different shapes. In eukaryotes, you've got the linear DNA. In prokaryotes, you've got a plasmid or circular DNA. All right? So those are the similarities. So when we talk about the visual differences, we're talking about the big flagella here as opposed to like a lot of tinier flagella, which the plural of that is called flagellum. You've got the endoplasmic reticulum here and the endomembrane system, which kind of goes past this with the Golgi bodies and down to the cell membrane. Cytosol is the same thing as cytoplasm, so that's actually a similarity between these two organisms. You've also got the nucleus, which has a nuclear, like all of these components here. Chromatin is DNA. The nucleolus is a smaller region where the DNA is found. You've got like the nuclear envelope and the nuclear membrane. So all of that is different to opposed to just the nucleoid, which is a region where the DNA is found. And then you've got a cell capsule and a cell wall. And the cell wall here in a prokaryote is made of usually peptidoglycan, which is a kind of a different composition than this animal cell, which doesn't have a cell wall. It just has a cell membrane, right? So those are the main differences here. Oh, of course forgot the pili. These are the ones, kind of the tails that extend all around the prokaryote and kind of help them adhere to other bacteria so that we could get plasmids out of that bacteria and into another. There's one more thing we've got to talk about, and that's the endosymbiotic theory, right? So this theory deals with the origin of two eukaryotic organelles, which we'll talk about actually in great detail next in the next upcoming videos and in the upcoming units. Here you've got mitochondria in animal cells, which are really useful for cell respiration, and chloroplasts in plant cells, which are really useful for photosynthesis. All right. The theory is at some point a eukaryotic cell engulfed a prokaryotic one without digesting it. So it didn't really digest it, it just stayed in there. The prokaryotic cell stayed in the eukaryotic cell. Well, what happened? The two cells established a symbiotic relationship of mutual benefit. And what that means is that you'll find these two eukaryotic organelles actually, the theory says they were actually very similar and possibly they were once prokaryotic organisms themselves, so single cell organisms themselves. But because they could have these unique abilities of cell respiration and photosynthesis, and because they're such big instruments in that, the eukaryotic cells said, well, we're not going to eat these cells. We're just going to have them reside within us so that they can make these processes happen for us in the cell. All right. And so evidence of this includes the similar size to prokaryotes. So you see that mitochondria and chloroplasts do have a similar size to them. They contain their own circular DNA. All right. So their own plasmids both these eukaryotic organelles contain their own DNA, which is important. Both of these also reproduce on their own through binary fission. Again, the exact same as it would be for a prokaryote. And each organelle contains its own ribosomes and cell membrane. And that's really important as well, because that is a distinction of the prokaryote as well. And so here, if you want to just look at the structure, you'll see a very similar structure. They're both shaped in this kind of hot dog-like shape. They have each a cell membrane, right? And you'll see in the labeling, you'll see the folding, which is kind of like a membrane in itself. There's inner membranes here and an outer membrane, and you'll see ribosomes within the two structures as well. And that's important. And so that is the comparison between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and I hope you enjoyed the video.